Good morning. And I think a few of the most common questions that I get is, so David, how did this happen? Like, how did we get here? How did all of these people, these deviants, and how did this cult get so many extra special rights? How has this perversion received by, like, how has it been received by so many people, right? Um, Especially like on how does it receive so many legal and social protections? And so, David, why are the politicians and the lawmakers so intrigued by this cult? And how could educators or anyone, right, that claims to be want to protect children be pushing this agenda? Well, the same politicians that are protecting the transqueer cult are also the same ones that are guilty of perversion themselves, and there's no doubt about that. Not to mention, they are guilty of the mutilation, the sterilization, right, the trafficking of children that stems from this agenda, from this cult. How do you know? 30 years of life knowledge and experience as an ex-trans, an ex-prostitute, an ex-pervert. This is what I can offer to this battle. And nobody is talking about it. And nobody really wants to talk about it. And they sure as heck don't want me talking about it. So I was a member and an advocate of and for the LGBTQIA plus, right, trans queer cult for over 30 years. I was also trans identified for 20 years. Trans prostitute back when it wasn't even pushed, right? It wasn't even protected. It wasn't promoted. Being trans, sure as hell, wasn't celebrated, and it wasn't allowed near children. And that's probably the most important thing right now, is that it wasn't allowed near children for very good reasons. I was recruited, right? Targeted, sexualized, molested at a very young age by trusted adults, teachers, counselor, parent of a friend, police officer, detective, neighbor, etc. And as a child, I'd engaged in sex acts with adults more times than I can even count. As a 14-year-old runaway, I'd go on to be trafficked and pimped out. And tragic as it is, I really ask that you all would just please focus on the information that I'm providing in this stream. So to understand how we have laws that protect this perversion, we must understand who falls under the trans queer umbrella, right? Who falls under the identification as trans, as the under this trans queer umbrella. And I'm going to tell you who. Perverts and those with severe mental disorders. The trans queer umbrella covers all of the individuals that identify as trans, but many that fall under the trans category do not suffer from gender dysphoria. Those individuals are sexual deviants. They're sexual deviants that suffer from mental disorders known as paraphilias. They're also a risk. Please hear me. These individuals are also a risk to anyone around them, especially women and children. So there is autogynephile, or AGP. That's a male that is sexually aroused by the thought of himself as a woman, and or just wearing women's clothing, especially undergarments and even nail polish. I've had a long conversation and session with an autogynephile that was sexually aroused just by painting his toenails. And then he would go into the courtroom because he was a state prosecutor. Yeah. And then there are transvestites, right? Those are the males and females that are sexually aroused by wearing opposite sex clothing, especially undergarments. And then we have fetishes, right? And so fetishes is a form of sexual behavior in which gratification is linked to a particular object, to an abnormal degree to a particular object. Like, I mean, we've all joked about having shoe fetish, right? Or foot fetishes. We hear that all the time, but there's really nothing to be joking about. It's a disorder, and it's abnormal. So this activity, right, to objects, to activities, to parts of the body, to children. And so, what is a paraphilia? So, a paraphilia is a condition that is characterized by abnormal sexual desires, typically involving extreme and/or dangerous activities. All right. And so, some examples of a paraphilia would be pedophilia, partialism, AGP or autogynephile, bestiality, transvestism, and that list, it can go on and on and on. Okay. So paraphilias, pedophilia, partialism, AGP or autogynephilia, bestiality, transvestism, and so on and so on and so on, sadly. Sadly, so on and so on and so on. So those who suffer these conditions also fall under the guise of being quote unquote trans. So these are the ones that are fighting for access into women's bathrooms, the spas, into locker rooms, showers, even women's prison cells. Yes, even women's prison cells, and into children's classrooms. Or these are the individuals that go rent rooms in libraries to have all age events. So in other words, they're having a children's event, calling it a drag queen story time or drag 101 or whatever they call it, whatever glittering nicety they toss onto it. Just know that it is deviant, and that those children are the unparents that bring those children there are sacrificing their babies to perversion, because these are the people that want access to your child's bathrooms and your dressing rooms. These are the people that want access to women's locker rooms and spas and prison cells, women's prison cells. So how does this happen? Men in power and women in power. But I want to try to focus on the men because that's what I know personally from life, knowledge, and experience. Now, I'm not a feminist. I'm not a TERF. I'm a man that spent 30 plus years as a member and advocate of and for the LGBTQIA plus transqueer cult, as well as a man that spent 20 years identifying as a trans quote unquote woman. I was a prostitute. I was a sex addict for most of my life. I am also a registered sex offender, stemming directly from the perversion, from the sex trafficking and abuse that I suffered as a child, as a teen, and as a young adult by the LGBTQ trans queer cult and all of its diabolical facets. So, men in power, who am I talking about? I'm talking about judges. I'm talking about politicians, like local, federal levels, whatever, state, whatever, lawmakers. I'm talking about CEOs of very powerful companies. I'm talking about actors. Like, we're talking about Hollywood here. I mean, of course, you can look at all of the stars, right, as they call them, at all their children. 90% of their children are all trans identified, but they're not all gender dysphoric. And they're the ones that say that. And what people don't realize is just because they're not gender dysphoric, that means it's even worse for them. All right. Because and I want to talk about these actors and these powerful men, these very influential and wealthy people, and then let's not forget the medical professionals So these men were my clients from the time I was a 14-year-old boy, dressed like a girl, out on the corner of the streets of Philadelphia selling my body. These were my clientele. And many of these men suffered from one or more of the paraphilias that we just mentioned. These are the very men that are not standing up against the immorality of sexualizing, mutilizing, sterilizing, sexualizing, and butchering children, or even allowing deviants, males, men, into women's female spaces. So the immoral find it extremely hard, if not impossible, to stand up against immorality, even if they know something is wrong. So porn has enveloped the entire world. Those individuals too, they suffer from perversion. Okay. So trans porn, and the reason that porn being so influential right now is important because transgender porn, believe it or not, is one of the most watched types of pornography right now. And in a close second is what's called fantasy or role play, like dad, son, uncle, nephew, furries. That also includes child pornography. That includes necrophilia. That includes a whole lot of dark sadomasochism, bondage, discipline, torture. It includes the worst of the worst, the most deviant perversions known to mankind. And so what about the Epstein list, right? And why do I even mention, right, that? Because of all of the perversions that were happening and happened, of the lewd and lascivious crimes that took place on that island, I truly believe that they're tied to these same types of wealthy, powerful, influential men that used to come to my motel room each day and every night. And I know how vile that these demented men can be and are. All right. I have personally experienced the physical attacks by these perverted men. There were times that I thought I would lose my life. And I had to fight with all that I had because these men would go cuckoo crazy because their sexual perversions were so deviant and so dark. And these were judges and law enforcement and lawyers and powerful CEOs, businessmen, politicians, Hollywood actors that would come, and they would come into my hotel room, motel room, whatever, and they would remove their men's clothing only to reveal women's lingerie. And some of these men, so the depravity of it is some of these men were actually wearing their own wives or daughters' undergarments. That's the depravity of it. Their daughters' underwear, their wives' bra or stockings. And so, due to these men's own immorality, fetishes, and paraphilias, it is safe to say that these men would be the ones who would engage in all of the trafficking and perversion that was happening on Epstein's Island. If they really didn't, right, at some point in their career in life. And so why would they remain silent when faced with exposure? Some of these men will do whatever they can to protect their dark secrets, their perversions, their fantasies, their fetishes. These men are guilty of pedophilia, porn addictions, satanic ritual abuse, narcissisms, sex trafficking, sexual abuse, rape, assault. And again, sadly, that list goes on. These men are laughing behind closed doors. These powerful men are laughing behind closed doors as they promote, as they push, fund, affirm, encourage, or celebrate the once hidden shameful activities that they are saturated in themselves, right? Including they're pushing bills and making laws to further the LGBTQ transqueer agenda, giving them extra special rights to the mentally and sexually deranged individuals that they are. So all, listen to when I say this, this is important. You might even want to write this down. All, and all means all, trans identified people have a mental disorder and need help, not hormones. Wrong sex hormones, or HRT, are psychotropic drugs. And these psychotropic drugs alter brain function, development, and structure. These poisons, these synthetic poisons, create dangerous, dangerous offenders. So I think that many of you would probably be very shocked at how many married, clean cut, successful, powerful men, even some that are sitting in chambers voting on laws and bills right now. How many of those men, I think you'd be surprised to find out how many of them are wearing women's panties or garter belts or stockings underneath their business suits, their judges' robes, their uniforms, whatever. And if they aren't creating bills and passing laws to protect this perverted cult, then they remain silent on the issues. Why? Because of their own secrets, because of their own strongholds, because of their own addictions, their own immorality. So trust me when I say that these men are so perverted that their judgment should be questioned at all cost. These men should not be trusted with or around children or women. So how many politicians, legislators right now are hiding deviant behaviors while trying their best to derail truth seekers and those trying to rescue children from the cult of child trafficking, predators, and perversion? And so me personally, I can sit back and say, how many of these politicians, how many of these legislators, how many of these candidates would love to silence me using my criminal background or my previous life as an excuse, instead of saying they really want to silence me because I am exposing the very perversions that they're enveloped in. That's, I mean, I think about that all the time, but I want you all to think about how many principals in the government school are wearing women's panties right now. How many principals in your public school are being sexually aroused right now, wearing their wives' panties as they gently and innocently rest their hand on a child's shoulder? What comes next? How about how many teachers are suffering from the paraphilias that we've already talked about, that are going untreated, mind you, as these sexually obsessive desires grow out of control? How many children are sitting in the classroom today being lusted after by their trusted adult educators? Ask yourself that. Especially during a time, right, when explicit materials are being presented to these children in the name of art, right in their classrooms, right, by these perverted men and women. How many judges are hearing cases this morning of children being victimized, trafficked, abused, sexualized? And instead of following the letter of the law, they allow their ruling to be influenced by the stirring in their loins as they sit on the bench wearing women's stockings under their robes. As they sit on the bench, hearing the details of a sexual abuse case, and they find themselves sexually aroused. How many judges are there sitting there right now doing that? How many women are going to be locked in a cell tonight with a man? I'm not going to say how many biological women, because if you use the term biological before woman or man, then you are proving something that just is not true. You are giving them some type of footing to say that there's there's a subcategory of women, because if some women are biological, then some must be not biological. No, all women are female, and all females are biological. There's no such thing as a biological man and a biological woman. That's ridiculous. There's subcategories. It's either a man or a woman. So again, how many of those women are going to be locked in a cell with a man tonight that claims to be trans, that has committed heinous crimes against women and children? And how many of those women in a women's prison facility will be raped, impregnated, or worse? How many board members? How many school board members, or how many committee members in the legislators? How many lawmakers will cast their vote to further the LGBTQ transqueer agenda, because they themselves are already enveloped in their own sexual, immoral fetishes, fantasies, or desires? How many do you think are going to stand up against immorality while they suffer from mental disorders or paraphilias that place them under the protections of that bright, glittery, colorful transqueer umbrella? Some of them wish they could come out, as they say, but since they don't, they're going to continue to promote, to hide, to conspire, to encourage, to vote for, to affirm and celebrate the perversion that's parading around as diversity, as equity, and as inclusivity. And I don't have all the answers. I'm not saying that what I say is the absolute 100%. But this I know it so well, right? I lived it. I was a trans-identified, perverted, deviant. And as one that spent over 30 years enveloped in that lewd, lascivious behavior, and as a man that identified as a trans woman for over 20 years, and really as one that has learned more about this cult and its agenda than most are willing to admit. And as one that's ready, willing, and able to expose this dark mass of political wickedness, I beg of you to please utilize this information. Please utilize this information. Because I truly do believe that the Epstein files, if they were ever fully released, that that could stop the entirety of child trafficking, as well as putting to rest the beast that we know as the LGBTQ transqueer cult. And in turn, it would put a halt, it would put a stop to exploiting these vulnerable individuals and the mentally challenged, because that's ultimately what we are doing. Every single time that we, or that the deviants promote or push or try to platform one of these deviant men that are saturated in perversion, They are exploiting the mentally ill. They're exploiting the mentally challenged. And so there's crimes against that. And we really have to start standing up and speaking out and pushing back, and we really need to start showing up, because there are so many people that need to show up. And I'm going to pull something up before I end this live stream. And I'm going to say that this is not like, I mean, if you are very sensitive to what you see, then just put your head down for a moment. But and I struggled with sharing these pictures. And there's nothing like absolutely, there's no nudity actually, but there's still depraved images. And so I struggled with posting them on social media because of the darkness, right? The deviant nature of this man and his cohorts. It's just dark. It's wicked. It's so evil. But I think it's important that everybody see that Baxter Memorial Library in Gorham, Maine, is where the unparents will be sacrificing their babies at tomorrow. In Gorham, Maine, Baxter Memorial Library. This deviant, hypersexualized man in woman face will be in the presence of children. And so, like, the one thing I can assure you is that this type of activity, this torments my soul. And I can honestly say that if this doesn't torment your soul, then you may be a far cry from the very righteousness of which you've been called. And I just can't. It's like, how can you possibly think? What could possibly be going on in your mind where you would sacrifice your child mentally, emotionally, spiritually to that, and sit there and try to act like it's okay? And how many of you, of parents and citizens, won't get involved because they're not going to go to the library, they're not going to call, they're not going to email, they're not going to say anything, they're not going to do anything. And why not? Because they are afraid of being looked at in a different light, or afraid of being called out for their actions. Guess what? If you fear being called out for standing up for children, then you need to just stay home. For real. Then you're no better than that deviant man that'll be in there trying to target those children. And I think that's about it. So I hope many of you are going and heading down to Gorham, Maine tomorrow morning. Baxter Memorial Library. Peace.